if you haven't noticed, they're pretty badass. And I learned how to do Photoshop in like a week. So, but yeah, so I live out in Blaine, and it's nice to come back to the east side because I grew up here. My first job was at La Taqueria de los Ocampos.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like kind of homecoming all the time. And then today I have the Cadence Records and Coffee shirt, and they're killing it over there. They use Bootstrap coffee. We did not get that coffee, but how is the coffee?
It's good.
It's from True Stone in Lower Town.
Okay.
Are you aware of this area at all?
Nope.
Yeah, you're knowledgeable of Minneapolis, right?
Yeah, most of it, and mainly just like I've been living South Side since I moved here.
Yeah.
And I'm working in the North Loop the entire time, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those specific areas is what you know. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong
bit.
with that, and I think that's one big difference between Minneapolis and St. Paul is like St. Paul. If you know St. Paul, you kind of know well, there's West Side, East Side, downtown, right? But that whole area, you kind of have to know the whole area to know any of the area. Whereas in Minneapolis, there's all these little coves and like these streets and like I'm from Lake Street, and then I'm like I'm two blocks down, and I have no idea what you're talking about. It's just a little bit different of a situation. They call St. Paul the last city of the East, and I don't know if they call Minneapolis the last city of the West, but it's like definitely a more West Coast feel, whereas St. Paul is like this building is owned by Queens Greeks.
Oh,
yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, so it's just like it's definitely like a big cultural difference. How long have you been in Minnesota?
4 years.
4 years, huh?
Over 4, yeah.
That's one thing that I'm excited about having you on the show about is kind of like, as you can see, this is, called Minnesota Well Done. I have people mostly from Minnesota, and if they're not in Minnesota, they cut their teeth here, right? And I'm excited to kind of just talk to you about what you see in terms of the food culture, especially in South Minneapolis, North Loop. Those are like kind of big staple areas of what our culinary scene looks like.
Right.
You came from what, Denver?
Yeah, Colorado. Denver.
Now, did you live there your whole life, or was that like a stop?
Denver, Boulder, and then I grew up in Wyoming, like right outside Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Jackson Hole. Yeah, I know Jackson. I don't know Jackson.
No one does. I'm from a tiny little town. The whole thing is like elevation higher than the population. Like, that's our gimmick.
I love that. I dig that, though, because, like, I'm getting to a point where it's just, like, people are a little bit much, right? Especially after this election and COVID and just, like, people have snapped. Everybody snapped. It's like, dude, your grandma's talking politics to you. You know, your great aunt has, like, a spreadsheet of, like, COVID results.
Oh,
you're like, we need to chill out, Irene,
Yeah, definitely.
We need to chill out. Okay, so welcome to Minnesota Well Done. I'm Christos, and this is Laura Lindsey. You are a pastry chef at the Hewing Hotel. Yes. And do you do anything else right now? I know that you are all over the place. Like, whenever I talk to you, you're like, yeah, I'll wait tables, I'll line cook, I'll scrub benches, because you're a badass in that way. But I know COVID has made things a little bit more difficult in that respect. So is that your only gig right now?
Yeah, so I'm just at the hotel right now, but yeah, I mean, just like anyone, dish pit some days, definitely breaking out some rusty savory scales and doing a lot of savory. I'm doing such a tiny part of just desserts because it's such a niche to begin with. So yeah, basically I'm a line cook for the most part.
Yeah. Well, I respect that. I'm, as you know, I mean, you've only known me as a line cook, and the only things that I really do is line cook, and then whatever elevated form of a line cook is, if you're a sous chef, a CDC, or a lead line, that's where I've lived for the last decade. So, you're like, I'm just a line cook. It's like, you know what? No, you are a line cook. That's the greatest thing. But no, I wanted to have you on for one. I don't know if this is like a thing with people who do desserts or people who do pastry or people who do baking, but like, I can't get anybody on this show who does that. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? I have one episode set up, and that's with the head of pastry for the Lexington,
Oh, yeah.
but she doesn't do it anymore. She wants the whole episode to be on like what life is like after you get out of the restaurant industry,
Yeah.
which is great, and I can't wait to do that episode. But I'm like, I need somebody who knows what they're doing, man. Like, let's talk pastry, because here's the thing. Pastry, and I put it in the same realm as baking,
Yeah.
right? It's such a it's a beautiful art, and in our world, it's very separate. Like, different types of people do it.
Okay.
Like, you have different hours, right? I remember I worked at the Copper Hen, and you know, we had a baker there, right? They were doing kick-ass stuff with their baking, I remember at the time. And us cooks were like totally fucked, because anyways, the point is, he would come in at like 3, right? And he would like 3 a.m. and like proof the bread, and then he would have it baked by like 8 a.m. And like then I would get in at like, you know, 7:30, and he'd be on his way out. It's a little bit of a warp of your perception of what food really is. It's like all of us, it really kind of instills this sense of team into you. So I want to talk to you about your pedigree with baking. Let's just talk about it. When did you start baking? Because I know if you're doing line cooking right now, I'm sure you've done line cooking before. If you do, especially if you're in the dish pit now, you probably started as a dishwasher just like me, right? But where did you start, and like what's kind of been your journey, right, in terms of baking?
Yeah, so I started cooking and just getting into kitchens in like a kind of an unconventional way, where I started baking on base camps. That was like the first time I was ever in a kitchen.
Wow.
My parents worked for an outdoor school, and one summer they were like, hey, they need help in this kitchen at a base camp. And I was like, sure, why not? So that was my first introduction of just cooking really outside of my house, and that was really fun, and I enjoyed it. And there's no one who appreciates food more than people who've been backpacking for like 14 days straight.
Wow, yeah, I bet.
Yeah, so that just got such a joy out of just feeding people and have people be so psyched and happy about food and so thankful. So that just kind of kicked off that bug. And then I really just enjoyed pastry. I enjoyed the exactness, the precision of it.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm kind of an all-over person to begin with, and so just to have someone that's like, you do this like this, I'm like, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. So, yeah, and then just as far as being in pastry, like you're saying, it is such a small, little, unique niche in some ways. So I always done part-time pastry, and then, you know, savory as well, just to kind of round out my kitchen experience. I think it's important to like be able to do anything in the kitchen. So, yeah, that's kind of how it all started, and then just slowly transitioned a little bit more full-time into pastry as time went on. So
I like what you said about it be the exactness of it, right? Because I think if you're trying to explain to somebody the difference between pastry and savory, that would be the biggest difference, right? Like when I'm making a beurre rouge, right, and I'm trying to emulsify the cold butter into the red wine that I've cooked in to the herbs, I'm not using, you know, 35 milligrams of salt and you know 22 grams of butter. I'm doing it until it's emulsified. Right. You know what I mean? Like, and it's different it's somehow different every time. You know, the difference in heat can change something. The difference in the power of the rosemary, right? If your rosemary is old, like if your thyme is old, or if your thyme is new, it's like, it's all these things. You just have to be constantly adapting and like constantly changing every single recipe that you have, right? And that's not to say that we don't have recipes. Obviously, we work off of like a baseline,
right.
But like you get these techniques, and then it's like, okay, you know, throw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I use a spoon, by the way. I don't use my fingers. But that, yeah, I'd say that's the biggest difference, because I haven't done pastry so much, but I have done a couple of dessert menus, because pastry people are hard to find, and honestly, like, usually they're hard to pay them for their skills, because it's like it's mind-blowing, the stuff that you guys do. So I've done a couple dessert menus, but it's like I really appreciated that exactness. Like, no, we know right exactly what this is gonna be. And at a place like the Hewing, I'm sure you have the proper equipment too.
Yeah, I definitely have more equipment than I've ever worked with before. And I have my own little station, which I love. I'm like so
Yeah.
protected of it. After being there for 4 years, I've definitely trained the savory guys where now if I come in and they're doing something on on my station, they'll be like, I'll be out of your way in just a second. I'm like, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, this is my pristine, clean, my area. 'Cause
Yeah.
normally, yeah, we get in and work on any kitchen surface and try to get out of there before anyone else shows up, which is why we're there so early. So, yeah, it feels nice definitely to have my own little station. But yeah, definitely get some cool equipment as far as like molds go. I mean, we have a steam oven, which is amazing as
Yeah.
far as like for me with cheesecakes and breads. It's just that's so nice.
Well, let's go into the importance of steam just since we're talking about it right now, because a lot of people who watch the show are in the industry, but for one, savory people don't know fucking dog shit about steam. And for two, people who don't, aren't really acquainted with that. What is the importance of steam? Like for, let's just say for a loaf of bread, and then let's go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. You're just creating like a crispier crust with that liquid and that humidity. And also, it's just a great way to control baking. Steam is gentler, rather than just like that hot heat. You're just going to really cook things very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that the intensity of the heat is something that I don't think people really understand in terms of steam, because they think water, makes things colder, right?
Right.
And it's like that's really what's burning you when you have a wet towel and you touch
Right.
something that's hot. It's like it can actually be much, much hotter because the water has gone into the gaseous state, right? Well, with like for bread, for instance, you want that steam so that initial heat will cause mass expansion, and you'll have what's called oven spring for
Right,
people at home.
exactly.
And that importance of that steam oven is that like you said, that crispness and the control over that intensely hot steam will stop you from burning stuff. I have some bread shops I've really started to get into. Actually, that book now that I'm looking at it, Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast, that I really it's such an art and such a, I don't know, it's like a human historical, like you're taking part in history kind of.
Right.
That's how I feel about it. So so we talked about steam with bread. Let's talk about steam with cheesecake,
Yeah, absolutely.
because I don't know what you're talking
I
about.
will never ever cook cheesecake in a water bath again. One, it's so messy, it's so hard, like you're trying to refill it. But yeah, so basically you're poaching a cheesecake. So you just put it on 100% humidity, super low temp, saran wrap the holy hell out of it and stick it in there, and it's perfect. It creates this really like light, jiggly, fluffy cheesecake without having to deal with everything else you gotta deal with with cheesecake. So that's awesome to do as well in the steam oven.
That sounds fantastic.
But I will say, going back to bread, when we were talking about like the exactness of pastry, I feel that's where bread is different, because anything, I was always been told that like time and temperature are ingredients in your bread as well. It's not just your flour and your starter and your water, but time and temperature are such a huge aspect of it. And that just changes so much with the humidity of the day, the temperature of the kitchen that day. Like maybe your flour is a little bit older this time rather than newer. And so that is something where you do just constantly have to feel and see and test your product in. You can't just grab a bread recipe and just follow it exactly, and you're going to end up with your bread. So much of it is environmental and what is going on.
Yeah, the control of the environment, I think, is an interesting thing to talk about, just not just with bread, but with pastry as well. And like kind of just a side note topic, I have a friend who just opened a restaurant, a Venezuelan place in the global market, right? And it's heavy pastry, but it's all heavy savory pastry. Like she has these cochitos, which are diced ham and cheese, and then it's kind of like it's wrapped in some kind of pastry dough, right? And I helped her, and she had all these recipes kind of prepared, right?
Yeah.
And we did it at her house, and we did it on this marble table.
Yeah.
And nothing was turning out, and we're like, what is going on, dude? Like, because I know her. She's she's like you. She's a badass. You know what I'm saying? Like, she's not going to come to the table with shitty recipes.
Right.
And we just couldn't figure out what the problem was. Well, all of these recipes, when she had, devised them or gotten them from somebody else, were done on a wooden table. And the heat transfer, between I forget the other word, but a non-conductor, right, like wood, and that marble, that stone, I mean, it just sucked all the heat out of it right away, and there was no ability to proof, there was no ability for, all these crazy things to go in. So that environmental exactness is also, like, so cool.
Yeah,
so
it's
cool.
Definitely something. I mean, any type of humidity can affect your chocolate, your sugar work, all these different things. So you're definitely constantly trying to figure out where your environment's at, what you're trying to do, how to protect those things, which is why you get yelled at when you don't wrap stuff on when you're working Garmo at Savory, because your pastry kids are like, hey, this is getting ruined. Yeah. Moisture is our enemy.
I love that, though. I love that. Sometimes people just need, they need a push in the right direction, and people just don't understand, right? Like, I think that was a big thing for me growing up in the industry. I say growing up, but, like, I guess it is kind of growing up, right? You learn how important these things were, and then you're like, okay, yes, I'll do that. I had no idea I was ruining 9 hours of work, you know what I mean? Right. Like, we had... at the Lexington, we had pot pies, right? And Jack Reba was very, very specific about how he wanted the pot pie to be, right? And even if you're on the burger station, which is, you're getting crushed by stuff, and it's a lot less precise of a station. You just need to pump out volume, right?
Right.
Well, you're ahead of these, chicken pot pies. So you have to have your egg wash, and you have to, before you put them in, you put the egg wash on there. Right. And then if it's not good, you're not the one getting yelled at. It's the fucking pastry cook, pastry chef who's getting yelled at. Right. And that's whack. And once I learned that, I was like, you need to tell me everything I need to do to make sure your pot pies are right. Because I don't want to fuck you over like that. You know what I'm saying? Let's take a quick break, and then I want to get into my theory on where pastry is going kind of in the modern world, right? Because we've started to see definitely a dip in pastry at all, right? Like, I think, let's take a break before we get in too deep, and then, talk about it.
Great.
Okay, so we're back. Welcome back. I want to talk to you about where pastry has been going kind of since the 80s, right? Because I think that in the 80s we saw a lot of investment into restaurants from people with a lot of money, right? Especially in places like New York, Chicago, and LA, right? Kind of the big wig areas of the United States. There was a lot of like people with money that they didn't know how to invest, and they saw art in cooking, and they invested into these chefs. It's like, this is when you see, 6-7 chain restaurants from huge Michelin star award-winning chefs. And since then, obviously our economy has, it's a very complex issue, but I would say that we're definitely not in a place right now, especially since 2008, where people are investing money in restaurants at all. Right. And so the people that are investing their money in the restaurants are the cooks themselves. And, these, I don't want to call them mom and pop shops, but they are in a lot of the sense. Even some of the biggest places in Minnesota where you have, Los Ocampos is completely family owned. Right. So I think, and this is, I'm asking your opinion, okay? Don't get angry. I think that there was kind of like an opulence and a luxury at that point, and that is where pastry really thrives, because you can do so much with it. And in terms of like a work of art, like, don't get me wrong, I think what I do is an absolute work of art, but I can't make a tower out of pretty much anything unless I'm using a plate that allows it to be a tower, right? Yeah. Anything above this height is gonna fucking topple, right? But you can come out with like a and this isn't to make it cheesy, but I mean, like, if you wanted to, you could make a cake that looked like me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think that there has been a severe dip in the pay that has gone to pastry in, I would say, the last decade now, last 12 years. And you're starting to see it. You're starting to see less creativity in dessert menus. And what do you think?
No, I'm completely with you. Well, it's funny when you talk about like the 80s and 90s. I mean, that's when you think of like chocolate fondue fountains or big sugar sculptures and all these just extremely ornate, unique things with pastry. I feel like, and now it has to be a little bit more. Your skill set in pastry has to be a little bit more. You have to be able to do breads, like you were saying. You have to be able to do a lot more than just ornate pastries in a kitchen to just keep you there, or else, what's the point of having you? You finish a course. You're not the main course, right? You're the last. You're the goodbye at the end. You're a thank you for coming type of a situation. So
you're making me feel dirty.
Yeah. Enjoy that. But yeah, I mean, and so you don't need, I think, the big, huge slices of cake or like giant beefy desserts are not necessarily a thing anymore. I definitely think I've noticed just in the past couple of years that, really downsizing my desserts, make them small, 3 or 4 bites type of a situation, just a nice finish to a meal rather than trying to be one of the main courses. And I think that's important. I think that's kind of a lot where pastry's going in general is, just a little nice bite at the end. I definitely don't think you can make that nice bite extremely beautiful and complex and flavorful and have lots of different eye-popping components necessarily, but it doesn't need to be huge and necessarily super filling. And I think that's where we're going to kind of be headed. I think food in general too, I definitely think people really just appreciate good local ingredients now. Yeah. No one needs a necessarily huge, extravagant plate of food. They just want something that, everything tastes really well. Everything's put really well together. You are using really good ingredients. Just simple and tasty and good with the right methods and techniques.
I agree. I totally agree. And that's, doing this show has been slightly eye-opening in terms of where kind of COVID has pushed us even more in that direction. And obviously that is what I've been trying to do for the last probably 6 years of my career, is go more towards the simple, it's like when I was at Broder's, right, which is where I met you technically at Broder's. It's under the same conglomeration. I met you at Terzo. But when I was at Broder's and I was, Chad and I were like running the patio, everything was like picked that day and the menu was constantly turning over. Right. And it was, much smaller and just fluid. It was beautiful. And that's definitely what I've been trying to do for years and years and years. So I kind of like that pastry is going in that direction too. Now, I will say here's the one thing that I don't really like about people calling it sweet and savory, is that I'm Greek, right? Pastry is incredibly important in our culture, right? Phyllo dough, right? I posted a while back this video of this like 80-year-old man doing the phyllo still, and he's I'm like, man, he's on his way out, dude. Somebody take over,
he was such a badass. He was amazing.
Yeah. Well, so the point of that is for me is like in Greek culture, and then as you get more into the Middle East, that fusion of pastry and savoriness becomes incredibly important, especially in like Cretan cuisine. Like bread is huge and pastry is huge, but it's not a dessert concept. And so I like to think of it as I hope that this happens with pastry, is that it starts to fuse more with the savory, and that's why I kind of like that you're doing the line and you're working a savory position, because I had a chicken pie from that Venezuelan joint. Arepa bar. Sorry, Christina, I'm not. I will give you the ad space. Okay, just relax. and it was phenomenal. It was the best thing out of that meal, and that's saying a lot for everything else that was going on. But that's because of the flakiness of the pastry, and that's because of the way that changed that meal just ever so slightly, because a lot of the flavor concepts were the same, but that flakiness and the way that it just the way it hit my mouth was phenomenal. It was like I couldn't get enough of it, and I have lost 60 pounds since the last time you see me. And
you're like the only person in COVID that's saying that right now.
Yeah, no, I had it all set up. I was already doing the kettlebells at home by the time COVID hit. So like when COVID hit, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going fucking ham, dude. Like, let's lose some weight, boy. But I think that is probably one of the main problems with pastry, is that you can't really make an argument for it being a health food. You know what I'm saying? No,
it's not. Which why it was like going back to it doesn't need to be huge. It doesn't need to be big.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a digestive, a little espresso, and like a little bite of dessert. I think that's really important. And I mean, like you were saying with your empanada, chicken pot pie, was that pastry has some really cool textures and complicity within that, but that doesn't need to be sweet. A savory panna cotta is a really great like transition over. We recently did a cauliflower panna cotta, and that just helped emphasize like the creaminess of the cauliflower, different things like that. So there are pastry methods that really complement savory components as well. And so definitely having an understanding of both works great. I mean, there's no reason why you can't incorporate them all in some ways.
I fully agree, and I think that portion size is such a huge problem in this country, because I'm not coming at people. I'm like, you're eating too much. It's not really like the onus isn't on the consumer. The onus is on kind of us as chefs and the industry, where we've just been like, here's a $300, 45-pound tomahawk, and I'm just going to throw it at you from the other, it's like, can you eat it all? We're going to wrap, 7 pounds of beans and rice in a burrito. Can you shove it down your face?
Right.
And I think that is another thing that's starting to go away. And you touched on it with desserts, but I think just in general, those portion sizes are starting to go down, and people are starting to appreciate the smaller portion size. And I hope that they continue to do that, because that's really, because like you can have a piece of pie. You just can't have the whole pie. Now I'm an addict, so that's, for me, that's a really hard thing for me to do, right? And I get that for people who are food addicts, right? And we'll tell you, look, dude, you put that pie in front of me, I'm taking it down.
Right.
I'm hunting it down. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
But I think that there's motion towards that, and I want to see that, because like you said, okay, you said a cauliflower panna cotta, and I don't know if you saw my face, but I was like, what? I was like, that sounds fucking fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's, I feel we do get so divided as like savory and pastry, and like, we rarely see you guys because we're there super early in the morning, get out late at, you guys get out late at night. Do you feel like there could be such a disconnect in some ways between the two? And it'd be really interesting if it was just more of a, like you said, like a team effort in some ways. I mean, I definitely, when I put out dessert menus, I'm constantly having like my sous chefs try it, just trying to get as much feedback as I can, because you guys have such a different palate in some ways than I do in pastry. Like what I think is fairly salty, you guys are like, no, it's not salty enough. And I'm like, are you sure? But different things like that. And it is, I think it definitely, especially with COVID and how things are starting to work out, just you have to be a close team. You have to be a small team, and you really need to be working together to put out great food every single time, with all sorts of different elements that can work together and ideas that can come together between you and any part of your team, really. I mean,
I'm really happy that you started talking about that team aspect, because I think that's something that we connected on pretty early, is I'm big on that between the front of house and the back of house too.
Right.
Like at Terzo, I seemed like a total asshole because they were like enforcing separation between us. You know what I mean? I was like, "What do you mean you haven't tasted the food?" Right? You haven't tasted you haven't tasted this food that I spent, it's like, or I forget his name and I don't want to say his name because, we don't necessarily have the best history, but he would make these, I thought, brilliant dishes. Like we had this, God, I'm going to forget what it is now, but I mean, he was using molecular gastronomy and but in subtle ways to just make things just that much more elevated. And by the time that the food was getting out onto the table, you were getting it from some guy who was giving you a 300 fucking person or a 300 itemized wine list and not even talking about the food.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, what do you think this is? Right. This is the wine is. This is if you want to sell alcohol, the food is your vector for the alcohol.
Right.
I am on your team, right? And you're not treating me like a teammate. And of course, I didn't say it like that. I have a pepper past, and I was angry. Okay, but no, when you came in, you were like, "What's up, man?" Like, this is. I started talking to you kind of day one about some of the ideas that you were doing. I think you were doing bread at the Hewing at the time, and you're like, I was thinking about using this, and I'm like, oh yeah, the moisture would be like fucking kick ass. That would be sick. Right. Like, let's do that. You should do that. And that has incorporated itself in the way that I now run lines when I'm working on them. We're all a team, and that. Waitress, however much she may frustrate you, is part of your team, and you need to treat her like you're part of the team. There needs to be mutual respect. Right. What were you going to say? I felt like you were going to say something.
I'm sure I was.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, definitely. I mean, we're all working towards the same goal, which is a great service. And I feel like, sometimes there can definitely be a disconnect. I mean, when I work front of the house, I work in a kitchen too. So, I have no problem coming up to the guys or just checking in, making sure I understand the food because I want to be able to sell it because I know how it's important for you all to make sure you're grabbing dishes quickly while they're hot, different things like that. But also understanding from the back house perspective too that front of your house is your communication to your guests, and I think it's really important to listen to what they have to say and obviously for them to understand how they're selling, how you want them to sell your food, what's important, why things don't sit in the window, so on and so forth. And I feel like that's great communication between front of house and back of house was what creates great restaurants, and the amount of times I've put out menus and, servers will come back with feedback to me like, hey, this didn't quite make it to the table the way it did during plating or different things like that. Like, hey, I think this might work better like this. I take that feedback and you are the one talking to the guests about my desserts and about my food. So yes, I want to hear what you have to say because I want this experience to be good. I want to know that my dishes are making it from Garmo to the table the way that I had envisioned it. And if it's not, let me know and I'll change it so it does. And I think you can, at times there can be, front of the house and back of the house and they're so different. And really, like I said, we're all trying to complete the same goal, which is a good service. And especially now you're working with an even smaller team and you're having an even smaller clientele and you really want to make sure those guests are enjoying it even more so. And it takes a lot of feedback and man, that's a hard pill to swallow. You kind of got to drop the ego, which kitchen isn't good at on either ends, about okay, dish isn't being received the way I thought it was, and that can be hard because it's so hard. It's like putting out menus to me is just gut-wrenching at times because you put so much effort and time into this presentation and then you're like, okay, let me hear about, your feedback about it. And sometimes you can be like, no, but this is really how I want this because this and this and this. And I'm like, well, that's just not how the guests are going to perceive it, or hey, that's really cool, but it's really not what we're going for. And you're just like, okay, cool. I'm not heartbroken. Glad I spent 12 hours doing that.
In response to that, because that's definitely how how I would say the first half of my career was that thought process of this is my food, right? And I was somewhat like beaten out of that kind of mindset by Chad, who I don't think you ever met, but he was the guy who I went to work for at Broder's, and I went to work for him while he was working there, kind of because of this specific idealism that he had was, you get out of the way of the food, right? You are it's not that you're a machine, but you are like a conduit for the food, and if the food isn't being liked by the customer or by the guest, then it's not your fault, right? It's not your fault, and it's not to say that it's you. It's just simply that is not matching up. So we become a conduit to something else, or we change just ever so slightly. Like you were saying, the feedback does not have to be, okay, scratch it. Right? The feedback could be, oh yeah, that cheese, it lost all its moisture and became basically rubber inside of the, on top of this or inside of that. And it's like, okay, now I get that. I think it was really eye-opening for me to work at a Greek place because at its Greek to me, there is Alkis. He's like one of my better friends now, but he's like 75 years old. He's like, I don't want to just talk shit about him. He's ancient, right? He's ancient and relatively, but the recipes that he's cooking are from his childhood that were being cooked by 75-year-old Greek men and women at that time in his specific area, and it's like you can't have. I couldn't have ego in that experience. It wasn't. Oh yeah, you know what I think would be good on that spanakopita would just be like a little bit of cayenne. I would have gotten kicked in the mouth. You know what I mean? Right. But it was a teaching experience because that is really what food. That's what it is. Now, the cool thing about the modern era is that we're kind of like reacquainting ourselves with what is actually available around us, right? So like when you say you want to go to the you want to go to the dirt, you want to get to the frickin' farmer and you want to pull the chicken, you want to pluck the chicken, right? But you look at the vegetables that you have, and it's December in Minnesota, and so you have to use these pickling, and you still want to. That's where creativity comes into play. Yeah, it's not about I'm gonna put my soul on a. This is how I was, you know what I mean? I'm gonna put my soul on a plate, and I'm just gonna like fucking woo, it was absolutely. I was putting everything that I was onto the plate, but I wasn't being a conduit. It was me. So like there was no room for change, right? Like, what do you mean you don't like the food meant you didn't like me? Right.
Oh yeah. I think when you're early in your cooking career and you're starting to put out your like first dishes and someone says something about them, you're like, wait, what? Fuck you. Like, this is how I want this to be. Yeah. And then you get older and you're like, okay, I understand how this works, or and what do we think? Do we think like lack of the amount of product or the most stuff you get in creates more creativity, or like having access to everything creates more?
Oh, absolutely. Less product, more creativity. Yeah. I'll tell you a story. I don't know if you watched the show or not, but I've brought it up a couple times, so I'll keep it short. But I started doing fermentation, right? And I was working at a place called Public in Lowertown, St. Paul with Aaron Cave, and we were working for Justin. And when he brought us in, the last 3 executive chefs had been in the red, right? And so it was kind of our job to get it into the black, right? So we're not buying truffles, we're not that shit ain't happening. We're not going to the south of France for that special wine you heard about, right? It's a dig at Terrazzo. And but we had to kind of make it work with whatever we had. We often used stuff that if the provider of our food had a sale on something, we would take it and we would elevate it, no matter how we could. So with fermentation, we took the myceliated soil roots of the mushrooms. You know, like if you get oyster mushrooms and you just shave off that top, that bottom, there's no way that you're going to scrub all that dirt off. It's going to be completely useless by the time that you're done with it, right? And so like and one of the biggest things in cooking natural food that you just picked is getting the soil out of it so that people don't just break their teeth off of the sand that's in the soil. So it's like, what do we do with this? So we had already set up the fermentation chamber. I was doing, a couple different yeast starters in there and all that. And we'd take these giant bags, vacuum seal them, and we'd throw them in there. And basically you'd get lactic acid and the other organic material that had been metabolized by the different lactobacillus species that was on that specific mushroom. And we would get these gallons of this delicious umami savory kind of like sour, but like sour, you know what I mean? Like it was just the liquid itself was like, oh, that's something special, right? So then we weren't buying vinegars, right? And then I was using that in risotto, which is already a cheap dish, right? But then I was able to make the risotto vegan, right? Because just the chemical, I'm not going to get into the chemical makeup because it's just way too geeky, and I'm not, it's like I'm not that stable, and but the way that it would wash the starches off in the risotto and create that smooth risotto, what you're looking for in a risotto, I didn't have to use butter. Right? And I didn't have to use wine. All I had to do was use that. And so the risotto became cheaper, but it also became more sellable because now it's vegan, right? And then we started playing around with it. Well, if we can use it in this way in place of a vinegar or wine, why can't we make a vinaigrette out of it? So we made a vinaigrette out of it. So then these huge, like literally, because we did oyster mushrooms as a side. Yeah. So we would get these, basically a whole fucking thing of oyster mushrooms, and we'd be sending, just throwing pounds of shit out. So what turned out as, a waste was now making us, I don't remember the numbers specifically in profit, but that kind of thinking, I mean, that's intense creativity, and it was kind of spread out between us, but it was definitely galvanized and started with less product, and we need to, make money. And I will also say this too, is like, that's kind of always the argument against like, oh, you want to go, sustainable? You don't have the fucking wallet to do that. And I, at that time and right now, I'm kind of like, fucking watch me, dude. Like this is, if you put the work in, like if you put not just the work like on the line, but if you put the work in networking and going to get your product and learning how to like be a butcher so you can get things in halves and quarters instead of like paying 3 times as much for the, for the specific cut of an animal. If you can learn how to do charcuterie with the parts of the animal that you don't know, for like if somebody says head cheese to me, I'm like, you're my people, right? Because that means we can get a whole hog, right? And we can use every part of that hog and we'll save money on it, right? So I think, yeah, absolutely. Less product, more creativity. Yeah.
I think so too. And that was one of the reasons why when I moved here and accepted the position at the Hewing and Tullabee was we have a whole butcher program downstairs, so we bring in whole animal, butcher it down there, obviously big influence on Scandinavian or just kind of northern cuisine, so a lot of fermentation and different things like that. And I think, with that kind of Scandinavian, you don't have a lot to work with. Your growing season is so short, so you are trying to take things that you got during the summer and make it last through your winter. And I think that is so important, and definitely with COVID and everything that's going on right now, we are getting less product in, and we want to use that product to the extent that we can without, repeating ourselves, but also trying to use less and get more out of it in some ways. And also, with our farmers, we work a lot with like Dragonsmith and a lot of other just smaller farms, and we still want to help them out because they're getting hit just as much as we are, So talking to them about like, okay, like what do you need to unload? Like, what do you have going on that we can help you with, so on and so forth. And I think that's such an important network too to still use. I mean, that's the thing too. I feel like people forget with COVID as they think about the restaurants, but man, you have alcohol supply chains. I mean, good God, Ecolab, the people do your linens, like everyone along down the line is being so hurt. Not just us in general. So definitely trying to, reach out to as many people you can if you are lucky enough to be in a position where you are still open, kind of spreading that love down.
I love that. Actually, let's take a quick break and let's get a little bit more into that, because you kind of hit you've been hitting a lot of buzz phrases. So like, I'm happy that I have you on, because it's sometimes I don't know how these episodes are going to go, right? But we're on the same page. Like when you kind of were talking about what does the farmer have, we're going to use that. That's been a big it's honestly a paradigm shift for a lot of chefs, and it's something that I would like to get into a little bit more in depth with you, if that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds good. Do you have enough coffee? Do you want more coffee?
I'm good on coffee.
Okay. Yeah. So talk about that. What you did with them? Just kind of like get us back in the groove here.
Yeah, absolutely. So for New Year's, one of the things we've been doing is Street Suite, which is we'll have a local chef come in and we'll work with them, trying to use our alleyway. We are very lucky in the fact that we are a hotel, so we have rooms. Right now we're moving beds out, putting tables in, doing a 7-course chef tasting menu, different things like that. And we're very lucky in the fact that we have these rooms that we can do it in. And just really trying to work with other people and chefs around the table. So I was talking about Dragonsmith, about how we were just short-staffed, and they came in and worked with us, literally bussing tables and just helping out. We hooked them up with a room for the night as a thank you for, hey, just giving us free labor, throwing us some extra product that we wouldn't necessarily have ordered in ourselves. So, yeah, we're, like we said, it's industry. We're, as an industry, to get through this horrible time, is all coming together and working together. And, before work, it was like every restaurant was like, not necessarily against each other, but, like, a little bit of competition, different things like that going on, where it's like now I feel like it's not a competition, it's survival mode. So it's just reaching out to everyone, even from being back home in Colorado and everyone, when COVID first hit, everyone was reaching out to each other, be like, hey, how are you doing? What are you doing? Like, is there anything I can do for you? What's working, what isn't working at your restaurant? Just so much communication, because at the end of the day, we are all cut from this incredibly unique cloth, and we work hard, we play hard, we're a team. We spend every holiday together. I mean, good God, I've spent more holidays with industry people than I ever have with my family. We're a tight-knit crew, and we're going through this whole process together right now, and it's important.
I'm so on the same page. Lots of the reason I'm on the same page is because you start to realize, like, if you're going to have any kind of like cuisine or culture, it's all based on what you have available, right? Because if I'm bringing in something from, I don't know, Brazil, right? Let's just say blueberries. Right, then it's no longer a Minnesotan thing. Right. I'm sorry, it's not. Like, your creativity is, you may have been born here, you may have been raised here, but that's not a Minnesotan thing. That blueberry is Brazilian, right? And so you start to, just for like, you want to know what is in Minnesota. Now, we have blueberries that we have here, but there's a season for it, right? So you start to get into hyper seasonality, right? And then when you start to do that, when you get into hyper seasonality and you are going day by day, what do I have available? It's not just what I have available. It's what Drake Smith has available, right? All these tomatoes are. This is what was a big thing at Broder's. We were doing pizza of the day, right? And they were like these kind of grilled pizzas. They're not classical pizzas, just fucking chill out. And but the tomatoes were so fantastic that all we had to do was a margarita pizza. But we could only do that for 3 weeks. It was a sweet spot, right? And the tomatoes still came in good, but they were out of season now, right? And so you enlarge that into the picture of the restaurant industry, and I've explained this in a couple episodes where the whole infrastructure is what creates something like a Michelin star, right? The Michelin star isn't because these guys are harder workers than us, or they had a stroke of genius in London, and we didn't. It's the infrastructure. It's the way that they work with every aspect of the industry. I found it interesting. I read one of Ramsey's earlier books, and he was talking about how he wanted to open a Michelin star, and this is a guy with 11.
Right.
He wanted to open a restaurant that was going to be, the best in his hometown. It was either near Dublin or it was Dublin, and he couldn't make it happen, right? He didn't know there weren't vendors close enough. There weren't, there wasn't a infrastructure for the delivery system from the farms to the city. The people that came into the restaurants were looking for something that was, they were just used to this kind of beef instead of grass-fed beef. And, it's like you throw this kind of fish on the table, and it's like it doesn't pop in their culture. So it's like, although I think some people this is my point. Although some people put these in separate, these conversations in separate containers, they go, well, you're either trying to be sustainable and work as a team, or you're trying to be the best and you're trying to elevate and you're trying to, make more money. And I think that this is really the key that COVID has placed into the lock and opened the door for everybody in the restaurant industry, is that they are one and the same. Right? Like, I talked with Carla Mertz over at Iron Shoe Farms, and I talk about her on the show constantly because, honestly, she didn't get as many views, so I don't know what the fuck you people are doing at home, but she's an absolute saint. She's a goddess among human beings, so, like, check that episode out if you haven't. But I talk about her a lot because she is kind of the genesis of everything that we do, right? And she used to, before COVID, it was all restaurants that she would sell to.
Yeah.
She breeds red wattle hogs and Mangalitsa hogs together to make this red marbled, ribeye looking like pork chop, which when the first time she said it to me, I was like, oh my God. And then I thought about it. I'm like, no, that is like absolutely genius, right? So to flip that script, right? Because it is a flipping of the script. Instead of going, I'm going to build a menu and then I'm going to see where I can get my ingredients from, it's the other way around.
Yeah.
What do you have, Carla? What are you trying to sell? Oh, you have extra chickens. You have extra, you have backs of chickens. You have skins of chickens. Okay, we're gonna make this, chicken-based chicken soup. It's gonna be a 7-course chicken tasting menu because that's what
Yeah, no, totally.
Absolutely.
Why not? It's COVID. You got to do what you got to do.
I mean,
chicken panna cotta coming your way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is kind of that's the beauty in what we get to be a part of, right? Because I say it on this show all the time, is everybody eats. At the very base of what we do, we are feeding people. And that's what we connect with. Or at least people, I think, who have been doing it as long as we have, or in the style that we have, right? Like, that is what I want to do. I don't give to be honest with you, dude, I don't give a fuck if the Broders make any money. I don't. And that's probably why you fired me. Fuck you. And no, I don't. What I like to see is when you were talking about you were cooking at base camps.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the joy you felt when those people ate food for like cooked food by someone who was
something that isn't dehydrated. Oh, yeah, it would be simple stuff. I mean, mac and cheese. People would be losing their mind.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, you can make people feel really good with food.
Dude, a similar situation I was in was not a sober house. It was a halfway house, right? And I had been eating shit for as long as I was in there. Like they shove starch and machine separated turkey tetrazzini down your throat like it's water, and you gain. I mean, when you met me, I was like 225 pounds. I went in at like 105. Like they just like pumped me full of freaking shit. Yeah. Anyways, when I got out, and I wasn't starving to death.
Right.
But when I got out, I went to this halfway house, and there was this old dude, and he had been through the program, and this was his way of giving back. And he would come in, and he'd make these little small, meals, and there was like 25 of us in the house.
Yeah.
And it was fucking mind-blowing food, and like you said, just mac and cheese, but it was like cooked well, and he didn't make the hot pasta by hand, but the cheese sauce was not American cheese. It was like an actual cheese sauce that he made, and then there were, he'd put like some kind of nut breadcrumb on, and then a special one for the nut allergy people.
Yeah.
And it was like the kindness in this old man, like it was like everything that I love about cooking. It was everything that I love about cooking, and I think that people can get separated from that in this industry, because it's a hard road sometimes, man.
It is a hard road sometimes.
It's a hard road. I mean, especially because, even until recently, that's not how people look at the industry. You are a tool, a cog to make me money, right? And I think that this is going to make me money, and if you don't do this, then you can't be a part of it. And it's like we're running, or at least I am. I guess I can't speak to you. I'm speaking. We're basically the same person. But no, it's I run on a like I can't abide by that shit. You've seen it. I don't even know if you saw my freakouts at Terraso, but I would freak out. I'd be like, what the fuck are you fucking talking about? Like I would like seriously like glitch out.
Yeah.
Because it's so important to me. Like, this is not, I didn't choose this career to be a, fucking, Dashi Saint and fucking, pull fucking bitches. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I'm not that kind of dude. I do it because, okay, I'm looking at that bread behind you right now, and that's why I do it, because that is beautiful, and in that you can feed somebody and you can give somebody nutrients for cents.
Yeah.
And they can honestly enjoy it. Like when I make sourdough, it's like this is stuff that I caught from the fucking air and grass and water that I just left out.
Yeah.
And I've turned it into this thing that makes your mouth water when you walk into my home. That's fucking gorgeous.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think going back to creativity with lack of ingredients, I mean, good God, it's like COVID right now. So I'm working mainly out of dry storage. And that what we've been there, we're trying not to order a lot of product in. It's dry storage from a hotel, so there's still a lot of stuff going on there. So, every week with this coursing menu, I just walk into dry storage and I'm like, okay, what do we have? What do I have? What can we work with? Trying not to bring in a lot of product to do that. And I mean, it's challenging at times for sure, but it's a great concept. And why wouldn't you use stuff that you already have, or try and spread good product for longer, as you can go. And talking about berries, I mean, it's not just fermenting mushrooms or making sauerkraut or kimchi, like pickling berries. I picked blueberries and brought them into the restaurant and pickled them to make them last longer. You can pickle and preserve so many things. Almost, I don't know if there's anything that you can't. I mean, you can do it with egg yolk. I mean, I just can't think of anything that you can't do that with.
Yeah.
And especially in a time when we're talking about, ownership of restaurants are going to be like so tight. Obviously, you as cooks and people dealing with the products, you just have to get super creative and just expand your mind a little bit on like, okay, it might not be like super fresh, but how do I make this last long and still keep the quality of the ingredient, just get creative out there.
Get creative and learn.
And learn.
Because that is a big thing for me that I learned halfway through my career is like, oh, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. And that's why it's not because it's not because I don't want it. It's not because I'm not a hard worker. It's because I don't know how to do it. Right. And from that point on, I remember the day that I felt that way, and I started asking questions to everybody that knew anything, right? Like oh, I saw the way that you did that roux. What was that? Why did you do that? Oh yeah, you bloom the roux so that, and then you got to make sure that you marry them, and then your bechamel is gonna. Dude. Okay, I'm not gonna get. It's 2021, and I'm like trying to be like more speak better about myself, and it's just turned into like I'm just this raging asshole. Like I'm the best there ever was. So,
self-love.
Yeah,
Here we go.
I'm learning the dichotomy. Okay, so work with me.
It is. You have to ask questions. I mean, good God. I mean, I haven't been cooking savory really as much as I have right at this moment. And, I definitely have no problem right now being like, listen, I'm a pastry kiddo. Like, please teach and show me. Just teach and show me. And that's what I'm starting to realize is at first I was like, oh, fuck, I'm not going to have, like, the skill set I need to do this. I'm going to make myself look like an ass. But at the end of the day, so much of cooking is show me. Ask and show me.
That's the beauty of it, though. At least for me, that is 100% why I love my job, because especially in like kitchens that aren't open, I can't see people eat the food, so I don't even know, right? I have waitresses and waiters, and they'll tell you, but it's not the same. It's about you seeing the way that roux blooms now, and me being a part of that, again, that human history, that tradition. I'm now giving it to you. I'm keeping it by giving it to you, and that if it's so important for a team, right? Like we were talking about earlier, we want to be a team, especially on the cook level, that everybody is learning all the time, because there's something joyful about teaching, and there's something joyful about learning these techniques that really, I think, elevates the food and elevates the mood, where that's why I was able to do these crazy, month-long stages and 90-hour work weeks, because what I was learning felt like magic to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something I think that is instrumental to creating a good atmosphere in a restaurant. And I'm glad that you are experiencing that with the people around you. Now, I will say this, studying also is on your own, right? And this is why I have these books behind me, because these books, they have changed my life. Oh, yeah. They have completely changed the way that I cook, and therefore the way that I operate in real life. Charlie Trotter's book has changed my life many times throughout my life. Just the way that I'll go back and I'll read it, and I'll be like, this is intensely, like, just masterful. It's a masterful work of art. And then, you get into Red Zeppi and you get into Magnus Nielsen, and you realize that you know nothing, because those guys are sages. Now, I'm using that as a segue to get into your shelf.
Oh, yeah.
Let's take a quick break. I have a little intro video for the shelf, and then we'll get into it.
I love it.
What's on the shelf, man? What's on the shelf, man? All right, Laura. I have a segment called What's on the Shelf, and we take your books down, or if you have products, we take those down and talk about them. But you have all books. We take your books down, we show them to the camera, and then we talk about them. Let's go.
Great.
Grab them.
Perfect.
You can do one at a time. You can grab them all at once. I don't have
the cover to this one, but this is my pastry Bible.
Show the binder.
Elements of Desserts. This book has everything I've ever needed, and the best part is it has recipes and methods and techniques, but then I adjust them to whatever I need, and they're gorgeous. They're beautiful desserts. We love them. So I carry this around. It's always on my station. I go through it constantly.
I love it. Let me look at it just a little bit. I want to see. Okay, so this is the thing about books, and I'm gonna get it up to because I'm not gonna be able to find this online and then put it onto the podcast. So I'm just gonna show it to the camera. Right here, what you're seeing is I love that when a cookbook has each step of the process, not just each step, right? This is what it looks like after you do this. This is what it looks like after you do this. It's like, no, this is how it transforms, and this is what you're looking for, because that is something that you cannot get. We talked about, the difference between studying on your own and learning in a kitchen. That's something that you can't get in a book oftentimes. But I can see page 6, we're already like, yeah, no, this is what we're looking, and it looks like that's for a custard. Now I want to get to some of the products.
Yeah, I mean, this talks about making your own chocolate in this book. If you ever get so lucky you're talking about your friend you showed me the other day, like he was making chocolate.
Oh yeah, he's got his own.
Amazing.
He's got his own business. He's an absolute gangster. Adam Hurt. Again, if you're perusing through the episodes, I think that's a good episode to check out, because he's in Nebraska right now. That's where his factory is. He's got a chocolate factory. And we did like a Zoom call where he went through the the chocolate fountain that he was using, and he talked about the crystallization of the chocolate. I've
only ever seen one, but yeah, the tempered chocolate fountain is just a pastry kid's dream.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? It just stays tempered the whole time. Magic.
Yeah. It's like it's so sick. And he was doing matcha white caramelized chocolate bars, and then he made this chocolate jerky. So like it was a play on like salted caramel, right?
Yeah.
Where you're getting that heavy salt hit from the jerky, and he would just blend the jerky up in like a food processor and then sprinkle it on his dark chocolate bars. Dude, yeah, he's a gangster. Anyways, this is about you, Laura, okay? All right, so we saw the chocolate.
Yeah, just all sorts of things.
Okay.
Do the pretty photo stuff. But
okay,
basically,
definitely.
I mean, here you go. This is kind of up your alley.
Holy shit. Bacon ice cream, Quebec maple syrup flavor, Kataifi?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what
like
Kataifi is.
It's like the hay.
Oh, yeah. That's a Arab thing. It's phyllo dough, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Brown butter, panna cotta, burning hazel. Okay. So it looks like a little piggy.
Yeah.
And that kind of like...
this is kind of like the 1990s, like we have all the money in the world, let's do this type of pastry stuff. But the burnt hay, like I'm so interested in doing like a hay ice cream during the summer with like strawberry components. Like just because this is like super crazy elevated doesn't mean you can't take like little tidbits out of it and use it. But yeah,
I think that is a good, you're right, it is a good example of kind of that opulence that we were talking about. But that is something that I would never even be able to do and say like you're gonna have to spend a lot of money to make that happen in savory. But no, I like how you pull things out of the book.
Yeah.
Right? These books, I never take a dish from Charlie Trotter. For one, it would take me 75 hours to do the prep for it, because he was a fucking lunatic. But also it's like, I'm gonna take this piece of it. I like what you said about the hay, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to try it. So yeah, let's move on to another book. But I love the pictures. I love the beauty of it. I love that you said it's your Bible and that you have it with you everywhere, because that is something that is important for people to realize, is that we are students in this industry. So
we already talked about flour, water, salt, yeast. Obviously, this is great for like the fundamentals of bread as well.
Yeah.
I would say, as far as like, because I've read tons of bread books, and this one was a little bit more easier to digest. Sometimes when I feel like I'm reading bread methods and technique, it's like so much information and gets so convoluted in my head. It's like I might as well be trying to put IKEA furniture together. Like I just can't figure it out. I felt like this covered a lot of good basics, and I know a lot of people are like sourdough life right now because they got time, and it's COVID. The amount of text messages I got about sourdough starter and the start of COVID was insane.
That's what I think it's weird that's I guess people were trying to learn skills and.
Well, there was a yeast shortage. They ran out of yeast, and so that's why people
I didn't know.
Yeah, you couldn't find yeast to save your life. So then everyone was like, "How do I bake without yeast?" And then, boom, sourdough was like insane.
Okay, so let's talk about sourdough just a little bit. I like to riff in this segment. So I think it was Michael Pollan who talked about the slow rise of the yeast makes the I'm going to forget the specific molecule there, but it basically breaks down the sugars. You're giving it more time to metabolize the sugar, and so the bread is actually healthier for you. Am I on the right track with that?
Kind of. It seems to be what it does is like wheat and grain is such like a roughage, tough grain, and so fermentating kind of breaks it down a little bit more so your gut can metabolize it a little bit better. I mean, if you just went out to a hayfield or a wheat field and just started chewing on that stuff, it's going to be really hard on your gut.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're just taking it and you're breaking it down a little bit more before you put it in your body to break it down a little bit more.
And that's something that you don't get with commercial yeast because it's so fast rising, right?
Exactly.
It activates so quickly, and honestly, to have it work properly, you have to be using a specific kind of wheat usually, or flour, I should say, a specific kind of flour, and it's got to be processed in a certain way, and there's all these unhealthy things that go along with processing in that way, and that's kind of I don't know, that's the plus for me for doing sourdough. For one, it's flavor, right?
Yeah.
But I have these arguments with people about flavor and health. I think they usually go hand in hand. If something tastes good, right? That doesn't mean if it tastes really rich, right? But if there's a good taste to something, that you're onto something. There is a way that you're at least close to healthy, right? If you, I think that when you're adding roux to stuff and it's all cream based, and it's like that argument can kind of break down. But I think with bread is a really good, it's a really good thing. It's a really good example of that, where the flavor comes out so much in sourdough because of healthy reasons. This is going to be metabolized quickly in your body, right? And it's full of nutrients. Like, people don't understand how important wheat has been to, again, the human condition. So I love that you brought that and have that. And I think, this is definitely one of the books that I started with, and I'm just going to put it up there. And I like that it's simple because, even as somebody who is a chef, who is a cook, it took me a very long time to figure out what the fuck was going on with bread. I mean, because for one, even just like the measurements, the hydration, it's at 50%. What does that mean? If it's at 100, I'm like 100% hydration, it's just all water. Like, it's like there was even a learning curve there, and then. Like I said, with the marble thing, with the marble versus wooden table, there was a big learning curve there. I mean,
you just have to. It's a lot with a lot of stuff with cooking, and a lot of stuff with baking. It's like you just have to get in there with the product. I mean, you could read all the bread books in the world, but until you put the ingredients together and see how it works. I mean, like we were talking about with bread, you have your ingredients, and that's super important. But also remembering that time and temperature are also in your ingredients when making bread. Yeah, because like I said, the kitchen could be warmer one day. It could be more humid. There's only so much you can control elements of any environment. So with your bread baking, you have to adjust your bread to fit those elements. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of recipe for sure.
Absolutely. And I like how you say get in there with it. It's like I saw that Chef's Table with Nancy Silverton, and like the whole time, the entire episode, she's on her bench and she's making some kind of dough or some kind of sourdough or some kind of pastry. I mean, and she talks about the hours that she put in. I mean, and this is pretty God tier shit, right? But it's I don't know, it's just something so special and something that I admire so much because you can see it. The way that she throws the bread down has been done millions of times, right? The way that she scrapes the flour in a certain way has been done millions of times. I'm talking all day, every day, for her whole life, and that is
repetition.
Yeah, that's an art. That's an art. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, Sister Pie, which I think so. Sister Pie is a small pie company out of Detroit.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for you guys. It's so great. Woman's amazing. I can't remember her name right now, but Jenny. She's super into community.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have any type of necessary culinary background. She will love to show you. She's hyper localized, down to teach anyone and show anything. super small community. She does all her pie dough still by hand, which I think isn't crazy because obviously they do an insane amount of pies. But all of her pie dough, instead of like throwing in the RoboCoupe or tossing in the Hobart, it's still all done by hand, which is so cool.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and so super simple pie ingredients, but yeah, she has like a salted maple in there, all sorts of really fun things. And they're just a beautiful small company out of Detroit. So they're great for anyone who's looking for like a pie book. And then
I'm going to have to check that out.
Oh, yeah, it's so good. And then when I moved here from Colorado, and everyone was all about like Scandinavian life or like Norwegian and I really hadn't experienced much of that at all. So I was like, what is the Scandinavian baking, especially working at the Hewing Hotel. So then I got out and got this Scandinavian baking book, and it was really interesting just to see what Scandinavian baking is all about. And it is a lot what you're saying with stretching out your ingredients, or just a lot of, berry fermentations, a lot of vinegars and syrups, and, a lot of just really good creams, lighter cakes. Yeah.
So I have something to show you on that tip, because we're going to talk about Scandinavian baking for a second here. Have you seen this?
No.
Okay.
I feel like all the main book I see is like the Nordic cuisine book. I did not see this.
So there is a Nordic cookbook.
Yes.
And that is the one that you usually see.
Right.
And that is also by Magnus Nielsen. Okay. But this, for people at home, is the Nordic baking book, and I have it behind my head for a reason, because this is the most insane shit I've ever seen in my life.
No.
I'm trying to get to I haven't read into it. I can cut out if I'm flipping too much, but I have to show you what's going on in this book, because here's the thing about Nordic cooking. You're not in just one area, right? It's like so all over the place. And Magnus has gone around. That's what is cool, and why people love the Nordic baking or cookbook is he went to all these different areas, and he's like, this is how it is in this region, and this is how they do it, in this season, and this is how they, they've changed it since 1800 to 1850, and then it changed like this in this culture. Damn it. So, okay, this just to give you an idea of what this is, this from here to here to there, it was about high oven temp. Now this to that is how to judge the bread is done, right? And then how to judge cake is done, how to cool things down, right? And then he's got all these different options, egg wash, all these different options for egg wash, the use of spices in the Nordic baking book. Okay, then he's got, tempering chocolate, right? But, God damn it, because this, we haven't even gotten to a single recipe, right?
Yeah.
And here we go. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So...
Yeah, that's one thing too that's so funny about pastry when you're talking about all the different egg washes. Everyone has their preference on, like, I use just egg. Depending on what you're doing, right? I use egg and cream. I use, egg and milk, so on and so forth. It just, something just so simple as adding something different to your egg wash will create a different egg wash. Okay,
so everything you saw from that picture of that lady to now has been buns and scones.
Yeah.
Look at how much of this fucking book is left, dude.
It's
insane. So crazy. It's so, look at the, and it's all beautiful, and it's all very artistic, and he goes into the science on almost everything.
I love it.
And so, yeah.
I'll definitely be needing to check that out.
Yeah, I would very much. I mean, sounds right up your alley right there.
It's
gorgeous. I can't talk enough good about this book because it changed. Magnus has changed my career in a lot of ways, but one is his importance that he puts on knowledge, right? Like he in his Chef's Table, if you watched it, I love watching the Chef's Table. I just think the cinematography, it's just like it's absolutely gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's just beautiful. But his specifically, he talks about how teaching the next generation is part of your job and it is part of the art, right? Whereas a lot of places, it's like there are specific people who teach the next people. But for everybody in cooking, it's important to teach other people, and that's how it continues, and that's how it's all word of mouth for thousands of years. Some of these places, it's like there was no writing in this civilization at this time when this kind of thing was made, and to see where it's come now and to be part of this, you have to study, you have to learn the details, you have to learn the science. It's like that's why this show is so cool, because I have the knife maker in telling me the different types of metals. I have Carla telling me about the breeding of the pigs. I have people telling me about every aspect of food. It's like that's when you said the people who do your linens, like I want to have them on the show, right? Because it's so important. Everything is it all works together, and that's what I love about this industry and about this show. So
perfect. Thank you so much. Do you find that you only have I only have cookbooks and self-help books in my library is what I'm starting to realize. I'm like, that's it, cookbooks and self-help books.
I think, it's a lot of cookbooks, and then self-help books I tend to listen to on the for audiobooks. And then it's gotten to a lot of I guess you can't say they're religious. Well, they are religious books, but religious books from all over the place. The Bhagavad Gita and the Bible and the Quran and whatever translation I can find of anything, because I really appreciate that. And then I guess I've gotten into, oh gosh, we're getting kind of personal, but I've gotten into, since I've gotten sober, a little bit more of the psychological tip, right? Like I started with Carl Jung, because Carl Jung was very, he was, I shouldn't say heavily invested, but he was instrumental in the creation of AA, right? Yeah. There's a whole excerpt in the AA book that is from Carl Jung, and then like when I looked it up, I'm like, oh, Carl Jung is the shit. He's got 950 different books on the psychology of man, the ego and the id. He worked with Freud. He does dream interpretation, mythology interpretation, analyzation. So any books like that, I've started to get into more, and then of course textbooks now. So.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, Laura, so much. It's been a fantastic episode. I'm really excited that I got you in here. And then when things start to open back up and start to change for you, I'd love to have you back on if that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, guys.
Word, Bert.
My heart, lovers remember my old arms are burning, my memory. My shovel writes a new song. I can almost hear them singing along as I keep digging away. Her love rubbed me raw, methamphetamine, alcohol, if only left me stay. Buried in the backyard, long after gone to my childhood dark bodies. Faces remain. your garage and got myself some dollars and cents.